Hello and welcome to The Point. I'm Marcel Wieder, coming to you from our studio in downtown Toronto. Today it's been over 2 months since John Tory was given the chain of office at City Hall. I'm joined by two of the men behind the campaign that put Tory in power. And with the mayor rejecting the premier's offer for a line of credit, is there a chill between Queen's Park and City Hall? We go to Robert Benzie from the Toronto Star for answers. All that and more on this edition of The Point. John Tory has been the mayor of Toronto for almost 2 months now. In October, he was voted into office to lead Canada's largest city, campaigning on a promise to make the city more livable, affordable, and functional. The road to City Hall was full of twists and turns. Rob Ford started off strong, but the controversy surrounding his drug use and surprising hospitalization led to brother Doug Ford's last-minute entry into the race. Olivia Chow's support collapsed in the final weeks of the campaign, while Doug gained surprising ground in the polls. When the final ballots were counted, Tory won by just 6 points. I'm joined with two great minds behind the John Tory campaign co-chair John Capobianco and campaign manager Tom Allison. Thank you for joining me on The Point today.
Thanks, Marcel.
Happy to be here.
John, tell me a little bit about the pitch that you offered John Tory. You were a part of a group of people who went to see John to encourage him to run for mayor. He had lost the race for mayor earlier, a few years back, and then he lost when he ran for premier. And so now this was his third kick at the can, so to speak.
Yeah, so it did. It's actually started in the summer, so way back. There was a few people that were getting together on a regular basis to talk about city issues and who they wanted to see as mayor. It was about the same time that Mayor Ford was getting into all the trouble and all the issues that he had to deal with at the time. So I was asked to attend one of the meetings very early on, and it was a group that really were committed to seeing somebody like a John Tory run for mayor and be mayor of the city of Toronto, and I totally bought into that. I've always been a supporter of John's. Back when he was leader of the PC party, I was supporting him. So it was a fairly easy sell to me to be part of this group that started off at 5 or 6 people and obviously grew to about 8 or 9 or 10. We thought it was the right time and the right pitch for John, and it took him some time, and he came on board.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, you had just come off a stunning victory with Kathleen Wynne as leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. You were then named Deputy Principal Secretary at Queen's Park. And what did John Tory say to you to convince you to come on board in his campaign?
He asked me if I would run the campaign, and I said yes. It didn't take a lot of persuasion. I was really quite excited that he was going to be a candidate in the race.
You've worked against John Tory in the past, helping Liberal candidates, part of the Dalton-McGuinty sweep. You were instrumental in electing a number of members to the legislature against John Tory, and now here you were going to be campaigning for John Tory. How did that feel?
Well, it's the nature of politics that if you run for provincial or federal office, you have to run for a political party. I belong to the Liberal Party. John belongs to the Conservative Party. John Tory is a well-known member of the Conservative Party. But municipally, it's a whole different matter. And no offense to my friend John, but I believe that John Tory was the Liberal in this most recent race. Small L Liberal, right? He was the small L Liberal candidate. Given the field that presented itself, he was the obvious choice.
So it's interesting because I recall the last time that Conservatives and Liberals joined together was Art Eggleton, and they came together. And since then, basically, Liberals supported Liberals, Conservatives supported Conservatives, and et cetera. And so how did it feel bringing the two different cultures together, with prominent Liberals like Brad Dogood and Mitzi Hunter and David Zimmer, who were all supporting John, and then you had your Conservatives as well. How did that mesh, John?
Well, I'll start off by saying it meshed well. It never starts easily. And I think at the end of the day, even the exploratory committee that we talked about at the beginning had some liberals and some conservatives. Case Oates, a very well-known conservative former deputy mayor, was very prominent in the exploratory committee and had been through the campaign and even in the transition team. So we started working together, but I think there's a level of professionalism that those like Tom and others who have been involved in campaigns bring to any campaign. So when it's a partisan campaign, then Tom and others will fight hard for their candidate, for their party, as I would and anybody else in the Conservative campaign. But it's the professionalism that people bring to the campaign. So they were putting their partisanship aside, but they were bringing their political skills into the campaign, and I think that's what made it work. And then I just have to say this, Tom as the campaign manager made it work. If it was any other campaign manager, the egos and the desperate groups of people from the political parties and stuff, Tom actually made that work, and there was hard days for Tom, but you would never see it from the outside, and I give a lot of credit to Tom for making it work.
Thank you. I worked on George Smitherman's campaign. I had a small role 4 years ago when he ran for mayor, and we had conservatives and liberals, so I had a taste of that experience working on a campaign with both. And I worked with John Lassinger on Barbara Hall's mayoral campaign.
Right.
So I have worked with conservatives municipally, and even with some New Democrats on previous campaigns. So that experience was helpful to get me through this most recent one.
John, you just raised Case Oates came on board as part of the exploratory committee. He was a key member, supporting Rob Ford at the beginning of his mayoralty. And it reminds me that another key player in the Ford campaign was Nick Cavalis, who left the Ford camp and came over to John Tory. So Rob Ford's former campaign manager and chief strategist was now working for John Tory, the same guy who opposed John Tory internally as leader. How did that work out?
Well, it worked out at the end very well, and Nick, I think, obviously at the time when he was supporting Rob Ford, felt that Rob Ford was the best candidate to be mayor at the time. And 4 years hence, I think he realized that John Tory would be the right candidate and the best mayor for the city moving forward. So I think he made the decision relatively early on and started speaking to John. And John, to his credit, wanted Nick and understood Nick's talent, the skill that Nick brought to the campaign. Nick is a pollster, has his own polling company, but is also an incredible strategist. So he came on relatively early on in the process, later in the exploratory side of it, but just before John made it official, Nick came on and started providing advice. And Tom will tell you, because Tom was dealing with it much more on a day-to-day basis, but Nick was a huge influence in the campaign, and I thought brought a lot of really key fundamentals to the campaign, but also his research, and say, look, this is what we have to do, here's what we have to focus on, and allowed Tom and his team to really focus on the campaign based on the research that Nick brought. So, it was great to work with Nick. He's an interesting character. I quite like him, and I thought he did a good job with the campaign, but Tom could elaborate a bit more on the details, I think.
I thoroughly enjoyed working with Nick. I recall my first conversation with John, the first serious conversation about my managing the campaign, very, very early, obviously. John asked me if I would be able to work with Nick. And I looked at John and I said, if you can work with Nick, for sure I can work with Nick. And it was a great experience. I have lots of great memories, and I'm really glad for the opportunity. It comes along so rarely, the opportunity to work with somebody who has that kind of profile and experience in another political party. And later this year, he and I, Nick Cavalis and I, will be working on opposite sides in the same riding. Don Valley West here in Toronto, I'm going to be working for the next MP and the last MP, Rob Oliphant, and he'll be working for the current MP, John Carmichael.
The strategy going into the campaign was focused on Rob Ford being the candidate. How did the Tory campaign recalibrate for when Rob dropped out and Doug took over?
I'll let Tom expand, because Tom was dealing with it. The only thing I will say is that from a more broader perspective, there was always some inkling in our minds that Rob may not finish the mayor's race. There was always something, there was, at the time, there was a couple of court challenges, there was some other stuff his health wasn't an issue until the very end, when we found out it was his health, but there was always some issue that we thought some police report might come out and might actually charge him or something. So we always thought there was a chance that Rob wouldn't finish the race. And of course, that being the case, we thought that Doug may jump in. But what unfolded and how it unfolded was quite interesting. And I think Tom could explain sort of the scenario that came around there.
I agree that right from the beginning, we talked in our campaign about the possibility that Rob Ford wouldn't be on the ballot on Election Day. Nick Kouvalis was very helpful in that regard. He was able to lay out a couple of scenarios where Rob would not be on the final ballot. I will say health was not one of the scenarios, and we were all really quite sad for Rob Ford and for his family that was the circumstance. But we had talked about the possibility that it wouldn't be Rob Ford on the ballot after the close of nominations, the beginning of September. So we were somewhat prepared for it.
And Olivia Chow started off really strong. She was leading in the early part of the campaign, and then basically she tanked. And I don't think anyone really expected her to drop as precipitously as she did.
I did.
Well, and Nick Kouvalis' research, I think, showed as well. But Tom did from the beginning. He kind of, because I think you actually know Olivia. And
This is the fourth campaign that I've managed against Olivia.
Yeah.
The previous three campaigns were in Trinity Spadina, where I was managing a Liberal campaign, one successfully and two unsuccessfully. But that experience, gave me a lot of insight, knowledge about how she is on the campaign trail, what kind of a politician she is, how she campaigns, and I had lots of confidence in her not winning the election, to put it very bluntly. It made sense to me that she entered the race as the front runner, because in Canadian politics she was something of a celebrity because of her time at City Hall, because of her time in Parliament in Ottawa. She had a very high profile, and she had the book and a very well-timed book tour. So she was, by our modest Canadian political standards, a celebrity. It's interesting because I think actually the top three candidates were all celebrities of a different, they weren't the same kind of celebrities, but Rob Ford, obviously a worldwide Jimmy Kimmel kind of celebrity.
Right.
And Olivia Chow, already talked about her celebrity, and John Tory, because of his time as leader of the Conservative Party and 4 years on CFRB radio, he had his own degree of celebrity. So it was a bit unusual in that regard, but I always had confidence that Olivia would not be able to sustain an 8-month campaign, that the more people got to know her and listened to her and paid really close attention to what she wanted to do as Mayor of Toronto, that people would say, maybe not.
John, Tom, I'm sorry we've actually run out of time, but I want to thank John Capobianco, the former campaign co-chair for the John Tory campaign, and Tom Allison, the now former campaign manager for John Tory. Up next on The Point, is there tension between Queen's Park and City Hall already? We'll talk with Robert Benzie from the Toronto Star next up. Relations between the provincial government and Ontario's capital haven't always been warm. Ontario's penchant for electing leaders from opposing parties on municipal, provincial, and federal levels has led to a rocky relationship between City Hall and Queen's Park in the past. With the city trying to get a handle on its budget, there are concerns a rift may be developing between Mayor Tory and Premier Wynne. At the end of January, Tory rejected the Premier's offer for a line of credit, opting to go to the bank rather than owe the province. This has people questioning what relationship Toronto's new mayor will have with the provincial government. I sat down with Toronto Star Queen's Park Bureau Chief Robert Benzie for more on what's happening between the city and the province. Rob, did you see this happening, that Wynne would offer a loan and Tory would reject this?
I'm a bit surprised that he would reject the loan because Kathleen Wynne has already forgiven a $230 million loan to the City of Toronto previously. So, but Mr. Tory decided not to take this loan and go and get a loan from a bank. And you and I both know banks are less likely to forgive loans than other levels of government.
Absolutely. Now, both Wynne and Tory have staked their careers on transit. Premier wants to be the transit premier. Tory ran the election on his Smart Track campaign, and now we're seeing that there seems to be a divergence between how they're going to approach it. How can they actually get on the same page and move that issue forward?
I think that they'll be able to get on the same page because at the end of the day, they have the same goal, and it's to get the GTA moving. I mean, the Premier wants the Greater Toronto Hamilton area moving. Mayor Tory wants, of course, Toronto moving, but his Smart Track goes into Peel and Markham, remember. So I think that they will find a way to work on that, and I think that's one reason why the feud over the $86 million hasn't been as sort of hysterical as you might have seen, say, with Mayor Ford and Ms. Wynne.
Now, Tory had a lot of Liberal supporters in the election. He had some very prominent cabinet ministers and other members of the Liberal caucus out there stumping for him and helping deliver the vote, which resulted in him being elected. How is that going to play into all of this?
I think Premier Wynne herself, I was one of the people who told her that I was with her in China when Mayor Tory won in October, and I was one of the folks who broke the news to her because she was at an event, and we just reading it on Twitter, we just said that they've just called it for Tory, and she said hallelujah, she was so happy. That was her first human reaction to this. She was neutral during the race, but she and Mr. Tory are friends, and she wanted him to win. Charles Sousa, the finance minister, and Brad Dogood, economic development minister, they were big backers of Mayor Tory's, and they're supporting him at cabinet. So I think that there's a lot of support for him politically here, but I think there's a $12.5 billion deficit that the provincial government is coping with. They have to find a way to pay that off. And at the same time, they have to spread the largesse a little bit around the province. They can't be just seen to be giving everything to Toronto, even though 21 of the 23 city seats are Liberal seats. So the Liberals wouldn't be in government if it weren't for Toronto, including the Premier. She's a Toronto MPP.
Given that all the economic aspect, especially with the federal government now delaying the budget till sometime in April, how is that going to play out in Ontario?
Well, we've been told that Finance Minister Charles Sousa will not be delaying his budget, so it'll still be likely in the last week of March. It's their first budget since winning a majority last June. So any bad news will probably be in this budget. That's what governments tend to do after they win a majority. They do the bad stuff early on, and then they hope that voters forget about it by the time the election rolls around 4 years later. So I think we're going to see there may be some tax measures, maybe some sort of carbon taxes or something like that.
Now, you just hit on something about the carbon tax, and both the Premier and the Finance Minister made it very clear there won't be any carbon tax. So what are the options that they have available to them?
Well, they have the cap and trade option, which is, of course, making big emitters, industrial emitters of pollution pay offsets. The thing is, that eventually leads to higher prices for the for people. If people want to tackle climate change, they're going to have to pay for it in some form, whether it's a carbon tax on gasoline, which is at really low prices right now. So you could argue that they could put a 5 cent a liter gas tax on, and most motorists probably wouldn't notice because gas prices have been plummeting so much. If you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it does cost money.
Now, interestingly enough, Ontario met with Quebec and California and BC to talk about the cap and trade program and how that's working.
Ontario has signed a memorandum of understanding with Premier Philippe Couillard in Quebec. Ms. Wynne and Mr. Couillard are politically allied. They are strong believers that something's got to be done about climate change. They both are very unhappy that the federal government hasn't done much on this file at all.
Now, with so much of the economy being generated out west in the oil industry, there's talk about resurgence of manufacturing in Ontario. With lower oil prices, the Canadian dollar has dropped precipitously, thereby making our exports more attractive to foreign markets. I understand that Minister Dogood and others have been out there saying that the Ontario advantage is back.
Ontario is now, but most bank economists now say Ontario is poised to lead the country in growth this year. This is something we haven't seen in a long time. Alberta's been leading the way. Saskatchewan, they've been doing very well thanks to their resources. Our greatest resource is probably our people, and we haven't been able to exploit that for the last few years with a dollar that was almost at par with oil prices at $70 a barrel. But with oil as low as it is, the dollar dropping, Ontario manufacturers have a real advantage, and I think it's good for the province. May not be good for the country in general because we don't want Alberta to suffer too much. But Ontario is still 40% of the Canadian economy, and when Ontario is doing well, others tend to do well as well.
Now, will that result in a windfall for Charles Sousa when he puts his budget together? That there's an opportunity that if there's increased economic activity, they'll be able to generate more taxes, higher wages will create more personal taxes.
That they're hoping that, but is it going to be enough to pay off a $12.5 billion deficit? No, the deficit will be lower next year or later this year rather than they've anticipated, but it will not be balanced, and they still claim they're going to balance in 2017-18. That's going to be hard to do without raising taxes.
Now, looking on the opposition benches for just a moment, there's a Ontario Tory leadership campaign with Christine Elliott being the front runner. We heard today at the time of this taping that Vic Fideli had just pulled out of the race. Patrick Brown, the MP from Barrie, is considered a second. There's Monty McNaughton from the London area, Lisa MacLeod from the Ottawa area, who are all competing. How is that shaking out right now?
Well, I mean, it's shaping up to be a race between Christine Elliott, the front runner, former deputy leader under Tim Hudak, the previous leader, and Patrick Brown, was not a very well-known MP, frankly, in Ontario, but he's a very good organizer. He's raised a lot of money. He's been an MP for about 9 years, but he's kind of been an under-the-radar type of guy. But he has managed to get a lot of momentum behind him. So one of those two will probably be the leader.
Now, if Christine Elliott becomes the leader of the PC party, we'll have 3 leaders in the legislature who are women. How does that impact on the first female leader, NDP leader, Andrea Horwath?
It's going to be interesting. If that's the case, I believe Ontario will be the largest jurisdiction in the world where all the party leaders are women, which is an exceptional thing. And I know you've been involved in this in movements like that for many years because there aren't enough women in politics. It's still only about 30% in the legislature here. So it'd be interesting. But does it hurt Andrea Horwath? I don't know. I mean, one of the great advantages she had when she was up against Dalton McGuinty as Liberal leader and Tim Hudak as PC leaders, she won the gender battle there, and she didn't against Kathleen Wynne.
No.
That was one of the biggest changes. I mean, she saw as soon as Wynne won in the Liberal leadership in January 2013 that was one advantage that she no longer had. So yeah, it changes the landscape for sure, and the Tories are aware of that. It's one of the many factors that they're looking at.
Well, Rob, thank you for your time. Hope to have you back on the show. Thank you, and we'll be back after this. It's an annual rite of passage. Around budget time, municipal politicians travel to Queen's Park to sit down with the Premier and Finance Minister. They bring a shopping list of items that need funding only to be told the cupboard is bare. Rejected by the province, they turn to Ottawa. They plead for infrastructure, transit, and housing dollars. There, they get the same reply: there's no funding for you here. And so it goes, this dance between the various levels of governments in the hopes that someone will respond to their pleas or blink. This year it began with Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, who asked the province for an $86 million bailout only to be told that he could get a loan at a very good rate. Next in line was Mississauga Mayor Bonnie Crombie. She wanted her Huron-Ontario transit line fully funded by the province. She's been politely rebuffed. The system that has municipalities begging higher-tier governments for badly needed funds has become a farce. In the coming weeks, municipal leaders like Vancouver's Gregor Robertson, Calgary's Nahi Nenshi, Montreal's Denny Coderre, Toronto's John Tory and Winnipeg's newly elected Mayor Brian Bowman will be meeting in Toronto to discuss how municipal issues can get greater traction. They're right. At a time when more than 80% of Canadians live in an urban setting, it's unthinkable that we do not have a national urban strategy to lay out priorities. Without a plan and direction that addresses urban issues, we will continue to have this yearly cycle of dancing both provincially and nationally. We need both the federal and provincial governments to step up and work together with their respective municipalities to craft a national strategy. It's time to show Canadians that our governments can work for the common good of all. And that's the point. And that's all for this edition of The Point. Follow us at Twitter at WatchThePoint, like us on Facebook, and check out our podcast at watchthepoint.libsyn.com. I'm Marcel Wieder. Thank you for watching.